All right, we'll go ahead and get started. This is a talk on espresso and screenshots. I'm Sam Edwards. Like I said, I'm Handstand Sam online. I'm from Capital One. And why am I giving this talk? Because I architected the espresso efforts we have for Capital One Wallet, which is not our main primary app or servicing one, but one based on transactions and tap and pay features. And just wanted to point out these opinions are all mine. I did work on this at Capital One, and they're nice enough to let me present this, but these are all my opinions. All right, so what is Wallet? Just a quick view of it. It's in transaction notifications, so you get a notification on there like you just spent $10 at Target. You can click on it. It deep links in. And also, there's contactless payments that you set up. There's also transaction grouping, receipt capture, and all sorts of things. But this is the example I'm going to be using throughout the whole slide, so just giving you context. I want to do a quick poll. All right, this is great.
Do you have these one for the recording? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Am I too loud?
No, it's
Echo? Maybe they can turn on a little bit or something. Okay. So yeah, how many people do testing on Android? I like that. How many people use Espresso? How many people do screenshots right now? Okay, and then how many people are doing Espresso with screenshots on CI? All right, good. That's where we want to go. Just getting a feel of where people are. In case anybody doesn't know Espresso, it looks like there's only maybe 10% of you, just 2 minutes, real quick. Then we're going to talk about screenshots, why you'd want to take screenshots, how you're going to do it, when, and the cost of taking screenshots. There's performance overhead and things like that. We're going to talk about maintainable test architecture, where you'll actually get screenshots for free if you follow this pattern. And then tips and tricks, just kind of things scattered along at the end that can help you. So Espresso in 2 minutes. Time myself. All right, so what is Espresso? It's a library provided by Google for Android UI testing. It's built on Android instrumentation tests, and it's aware of idle state, and therefore like lightning fast, right? So idle state means that the main thread is not doing anything in your application, and it can continue on, which is different from a normal testing framework that kind of looks from the outside into the Android app, and it says like, oh, well, this networking call is happening, let's wait 5 seconds, and then we'll check something. So Espresso is really fast because of that. Also, the syntax is very easy to read and write. So Espresso Basics, this is a cheat sheet that you can find on the Espresso website. If you're looking along at the slides, there's a tiny little link on the bottom down there. But if you go there, it's actually more than this. But just real quick, in Espresso, you grab a view. Then you either perform an action or you check an assertion on it. So quick things that you can do then is you can find a view by an ID, by text. So you have your resource ID, you have text, you have all different. You can do it by content, description, things like that. You can perform actions. What's that? Oh, sure. You can perform actions like click, double click, long click, press back, things like that. And do assertions like, is this enabled? Is it displayed? And things of that manner. So that's your quick overview. And an example of this real quick would be grabbing the view with the text login and then checking that it is not enabled. Next thing would be grabbing a view with the ID of username and performing a typing of the text Sam in there. And last, we're going to grab the login button with the text login and then perform a click on it. So super easy syntax. That's why everybody's onto it. This is a big thing, though, the target audience for Espresso. Dance and Mike. There we go. So typically, you kind of see UI testing done by QA teams, and it's done in like a black box setting. At least like that's what we saw for a long time, where your QA team will say, okay, we have your app. We're going to look from the outside. It's going to hit our live server. We're going to do all these black box tests. But really, for Espresso, it's targeted towards developers, and its power is really unlocked by understanding the code base and really like being able to power that. So anyway, what's nice about it, if you use this pattern I'm talking about, your QA members, if they're not super technical, like we've actually onboarded them, and they're using this pattern, and they're able to write tests against black box settings as well, and the developers write it against mock data. So this is for us. If you want to learn more about Espresso, I can't pronounce his name, but this guy at Google is awesome, and then Chuki Chan is really great too. Here's videos. You can click on all these links, and that's our 2 minutes. All right, so we know what Espresso is. Now, why are we going to take screenshots? Got 3 reasons. Number 1, you want to see what's being tested. So typically, if you do your tests, you get console output, right? And that's fine, but next step you're going to do is potentially run an Android Studio, and then you get a nice little pretty printout of what happened. And then if you use a test runner like Spoon, which is what I'm going to talk about primarily, then you can get something like this where it shows something more pretty, right? But then you can do, with Spoon, you can take screenshots and actually add those into your report. So when you run your tests, you can see what's being tested, right? The welcome screen pages, sure, I know that I'm testing the welcome screen, but like if I go in there, how do I actually know what was being tested, right? So I can see all the screens as I went through. Number 2 is you want to diagnose failures, right? So screenshots, if a failure happens, you have all that console output, and you have this. So oops, you didn't find a view in the hierarchy with the text on. And if you actually went in the slide and zoomed out, text like kind of spills down the page. So this isn't even all of it. But, oh, I can see why my test failed, right? So actually, done was not all capitalized. It was just the first letter was capitalized. So this gives me a lot of context into why my test failed. And if you're running this in a headless environment in your CI or whatever, like you have no view into it. So screenshots are great for that. So that last point of if your test fails, getting a screenshot, I'm just going to jump right into that and show you how to do that. So in Espresso, there's a global failure handler that you can override. So you can just set one up here, espresso.setFailureHandler, and then pretty much in the handle, you're just going to go ahead and take your screenshot and say test failed. Now what happens though is that if that's all you do, your test will continue to keep running. So what you need to do is then use your default failure handler and then kind of just throw the runtime exception. So what that will do is allow you to take the screenshot and then just kind of tell Espresso to stop, or tell the Android runtime to stop. That's it. All right. So this is an example. If we went ahead and ran a test in Spoon, this output is a lot larger, the text here, but it would go ahead and say, here's your screenshot of why it failed or where it failed, and the test. So number 3 is share your tests. Right? So we've seen what's being tested. We can diagnose failures in like a headless environment, but we want to share your tests, and that's kind of like the big point, or the biggest benefit I think you get out of screenshots. So no one sees the value of your tests yet. That's why it's going to change after this, right? So your boss, your product owners, your designers, manual testers, and I'm being stereotypical, right? You have great people on your team that like actually appreciate these things, but for the most part, they don't. They see console. Sorry. That's because they can't tell what your tests are doing and don't find any use for them. To them, it's just console output, right? They just see like, oh, you wrote a test, great, where's my story? Let's move on to the next task. But there's a lot of value when they can actually see what's being tested. So let everyone see what's being tested. So this is design, product, whatever. Like any developer even can look in, and if you saw like, oh, log into home screen, like you have some idea of what's happening there, but when you can visually see every step that's happening, it makes so much more sense. So this is my like designer hippy-dippy thing. The user interfaces are visual. A user interface is something very hard to represent in a non-visual way. We try to do that with voice and other things, but in this case, in Espresso and screenshots, we're talking about the visual manner. So our exercise here is to imagine if you were described to somebody that was blind what the Mona Lisa painting looks like. Same as if your test failure happens, what does that look like? Espresso obviously gives you 1,000 words of console output, but in this case, she's of olive complexion, there's a nice landscape in the back, like it would take forever. So anyway, that's Espresso, a screenshot's worth 1,000 words. And with Espresso and Android, if you run your test, and it's the exact same test for a login, just one screenshot of it, it looks completely different on 2 different devices, right? And the good thing about Android is it embraces differences. And this whole ad campaign that started a couple of years ago of Android be together, not the same, it like kind of deals with Android targeting people of all shapes and sizes and devices of shapes and sizes, right? So we're going to developing countries, we're not making people charge $700 for an iPhone. So because of that, though, as developers, we have to deal with this fragmentation of and permutations of devices. So the different size device, the Android OS version, and we don't even mention Nougat in that graphic, the device type, meaning your manufacturer or the model, and then the language, right? So even the language, how are you going to see, like, what does it look like in Hindi, or what does it look like in Spanish? Or if you do internationalization, then, like, with screenshots, you can do all these variations and look at that. And this is a manual effort, and we'll talk a little bit later about things that you can do to automate, but this is really great, and you get this for free with this screenshot pattern. So you've kind of seen Spoon a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and kind of like use this as my primary tool because that's what we use, and then tell you how you can leverage that. That was their website up there. As you can click on all these links in the slides. But so Spoon comes with a test runner. There's 2 things. There's actually just a Java jar that you can put in to take screenshots. It's like a client library. And then you have a test runner, which you can then run on the command line, which is java.jar. And what you do is you say, here's my Spoon test runner jar, here's my APK, here's my test APK, and automatically it'll just go out and run all of your tests. So you get that, and you get the HTML report where, there's no screenshots by default, but it makes it look really pretty. So here's an example of that. This is our suite that a little while ago that was just 70 tests. We're expanding, it's 85 now, just started this a couple months ago. So anyway, you'll see 2 lines here as soon as it comes back up. So this is a smaller device, this is our minimum device, and then we have a 10-inch tablet, just for the pure sake of let's see the differences of this. So they were run in parallel, 70 tests, 70 tests, and like each one of these little bars down here, you can see the example is like one test result, right? So if something fails, you'll see it's red. You can click into that, and then you get the more detailed report like we were seeing. So this is an example of our login to home screen smoke test, right? So our QA used this for a long time in a black box environment. I wanted to go ahead and move it to this like controlled environment with mock data. So in this case, it's absolutely easy to see what's happening, right? You're logging in, you're going through a first-time user experience, you're going to the home screen, you're going to a transaction, you're redeeming rewards, you're doing all these things. And I don't have a good example of this here, but Spoon's really great because when you take a screenshot, you pass in like the name of the screenshot essentially. And as you hover over each one of these, it would say like skipping welcome screen and like entering username and so forth. So like as you name your screenshots, you actually get that context as you hover over the items in Spoon. So this is the same test, but run on the small device as well as on the 10-inch tablet. Come back up on that. So yeah, as well as the 10-inch tablet. And what's nice is, as you can see, this is completely different. The terms of service is like such a huge thing. And so this is a good example of like, this is the exact same screen, exact same code, but it looks completely different. So right now, the reason I was able to get away with this is we're doing a material redesign right now. And the ability for our product owners and designers to go and look at this, all these combinations on all these different screens is like super valuable to our team. So GIFs. I was going to show a live demo, but this is my live demo here because I don't want anything to fail. So this is the exact test you've been seeing. GIFs are actually generated by default. So if you just went ahead and ran that command with Spoon, it would generate a GIF of all the screenshots in each test. This is an example here of that exact test. The problem is that once it pulls the screenshots off the device and processes the GIF, this actually took 11 seconds just for this one. So we don't use this really, because especially you have like all the screenshots anyway. I don't know, it's gimmicky, it works. So if you want to turn it off, you just use no animations, and on their documentation they have all those commands. All right, so we've talked about why screenshots are good, why we want to do them, but how are we going to do them, right? So I told you that Spoon has a client library. And so here's an example of that screenshot. But there's two other ones that I want to talk about that I prefer. So there's Falcon and UI Automator. And this screenshot is actually the exact same one. So what you'll see though here is this doesn't have the dialogue. This here doesn't have like the virtual buttons. And so like it's different in each case. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next screen as well. It's the same sort of thing, but with a context menu. So here, once again, you don't have any virtual buttons, you don't have the title bar, and you don't have any elevation. Here you have the elevation, but you don't have the system like bar and everything else, and there you have everything. So UI Automator is only available on platform 18 and above, but it gives you like the prettiest screenshots. I'm gonna tell you why I kind of like Falcon the best. But yeah, you can see you actually get the full screen. Because if you took a screenshot of this saying, oh, my context menu has been validated, it doesn't do much for you. So Spoon is really nice that has that baked in, but that's not its strength. So the syntax of how you're actually gonna take these screenshots, it's pretty easy. You just say spoon.screenshot, you pass in your activity, and then the tag is like that text description of what you want to take. You can only run this if you're actually inside the test. So if you're in your test method, not even in a helper method that calls from there, then this will work. Because the way Spoon works is it actually like generates the screenshot in a specific directory on the device, pulls that off, and then generates the HTML report based on that. So unless you actually have the test class name method and the tag, it won't know where to pull things off on. So that issue that I talked about where you don't get the elevation is actually documented here in their issue number 4. And it refers to that Falcon library. So that's where I found out about that. And what's cool about it is Falcon has this thing called Spoon Compat. So if you do Falcon Spoon.screenshots, it's the exact same API. Instead of Spoon, you're doing Falcon Spoon. You basically just get it out of the box. So it's just a different jar. You swap it out from the Spoon client to Falcon Compat, and you're good to go. It actually still imports it's a dependency to have the Spoon client because, the Spoon client jar because that will generate the file that needs to be written to so that it generates up in the report. So UI Automator, like as I said, like these are the prettiest screenshots. It's a little bit more work, but not much because you're going to abstract this out into just a helper method to take the screenshot anyway. But you use Spoon to go ahead and basically generate the file that this should be written to on the Android device. And then right after that, you'll go ahead and say, take a screenshot with UI device, and here's the output file I want you to go to. So just write this bitmap to a file. We're good to go. And as I said, it's a caveat that it only works on platform 18 and above. And what's nice about UI Automator too is it works outside of your app. So typically Espresso is just like your app, if you went to a notification, or went to the home screen or things like that, Espresso typically doesn't work. But with UI Automator, you can go outside and take screenshots of your system in general. So yeah, there's links to that. So other alternatives to screenshots, you guys, if you went to the Fabrics Fastlane, they have Screen Grab, which actually uses UI Automator for 18 and up. And I talked to Andrea from their team, and it looks like that their implementation for below 18 is very similar to what Spoon has, and it doesn't capture the elevation. But that's awesome if you're using these tool sets, you get it for free. And also Firebase Test Lab has a screenshotter, which is pretty neat, but because it doesn't integrate directly with Spoon, I don't really cover that. All right, so as you saw, the API is pretty, not complex. We say take screenshot, activity, the name of my screenshot, the test class, and then the method name. And that gets kind of ugly, so I'm going to give you some hints here so you can just abstract this out. So it's literally just take screenshot. So what you need to do is actually get the currently running activity. So everybody knows the Android lifecycle, and when on resume happens, that means your activity is ready to go. So you just query in the activity lifecycle monitor registry, that's a tongue twister, and then you go ahead and grab the activity with the state resumed and return that back. And this is important, especially in Espresso tests that traverse over multiple activities, because your activity test rule will generally give you back, here's my login page, but if you're at the home screen, you can't take a screenshot of that with the old reference to the activity. So this is very helpful. And then the other hack is, I was mentioning, with Spoon, you have to actually be in the test method itself for it to use reflection, not reflection, but the hierarchy of the stack trace to figure out where to put that in the file system. So this is my hack here, where you go ahead and grab the stack trace, and you basically just traverse it back until you find a method that has the annotation of test, right? So all of your new JUnit 4 tests have @test annotation. So you're just hacking, you're going all the way back in the stack trace, no matter how many helpers deep you are. And then you can get the right class name and method name, so you just print out your screenshot. So what that means is your previous, syntax to do this had 4 parameters. Now you're just saying, take my screenshot, because you know the activity, you know the method, and you know the test. So abstract that out, it's so much easier. So, all right, when do we take screenshots? As we talked about, definitely take them on failures. It gives you so much context, it's worth 1,000 words. Also, I was talking with our material redesign, if you're going to generate a report for product and design teams, this is great. Here, go check this out. Right before I left for this conference, we're mid-material redesign. Our product owner requested it, so I sent it off to him. So we actually have them generating on our small devices on our CI server, but it's kind of cool to get it on the multiple devices. And then also, I would say during development and when you're debugging tests, go ahead and run it on a small emulator, and then you're just getting it for free right there. I'm actually going to talk about the performance overheads next. About all these screenshot libraries, and you can see why it's really not that bad to do screenshots while you're doing development. Can we hold those to the end actually, just because there's a lot? Thank you. So it's the cost of screenshots, right? So there's a performance overhead I wanted to talk about. So I spent basically an entire day running all these different variations of things. So it gives us a little insight, and it's pretty telling. So what I went ahead and did is typically all of my tests I'm running are on Android emulators. And I went ahead and we have 3 devices, one being that very small device, one being a Nexus 5, and one being a Nexus 6P. And so if you look on here, the different colors is small emulator, Nexus 5, and 6P. And then going over, you have, if you took no screenshots at all, this is the execution time. So we're talking between 6 and 8 minutes. And then if you're going to use Falcon, it's between 8 minutes and 16 minutes, depending on the size emulator you're using. And then finally, it can go really high with UI Automator. So as you're seeing, there's a big cost to using UI Automator for those pretty screenshots. So if we look at the numbers here, if we're going to use Falcon on the small emulator, like you want to use in your dev machine, you're only talking about a 16% overhead. So you get all the screenshots, you can see what's happening, and it's really not that big of a cost. UI Automator, if you're doing things like you want to put it in, just have it be more pretty, it's really not too bad either. But as you keep going, talking about 168% increase, because you're talking about an XX HDPI. I think it's even a little bit more than that. Screen in a Nexus 6P, and the UI Automator just takes longer because it has more to take a picture of. We talked about how much time it takes, but then what is the file size of this? And it's kind of, I don't know why I didn't figure this out in the beginning, but they are very, very linked, because the bigger the file size, the bigger the file is going to be written on the Android device and then has to be pulled off. But your report size in megabytes is obviously very small when there's no screenshots. But as you keep going and you use Falcon or UI Automator, it's pretty consistent, right? So if you have a screenshot, it's the same size PNG file, same size overhead. So here are the stats on that, but basically 17, 18%, 65, and 90% is the cost as you go along. So I talked about getting this for free now, right? So maintainable test architecture is super important. And so we're going to talk about how we do that and how you can do it if you want. And Jake Warden did a talk a little while ago on the robot test pattern. And I'm kind of hijacking a few of his slides just because it's so well put. But yeah, you can go ahead and click on that link for a video or the slides. It's a really great talk. I highly recommend it to everyone. The short of it is, and this will be about 60 seconds, is in your app, everybody cares about your architecture, right? You have model view presenter, and that's your architecture. This is great. You have separation of concerns. If you have a test, though, you're just slapping it on the top. There's no architecture really involved. It's just your test interacting with your view. So what happens is you have your great text, your architecture for your application. When you get to your test, you're just stacking them up on top, right? So there's really no cohesiveness to it. So what happens if your view changes, every single one of the tests that rely on that fails. So if you're like looking for the button with login and the product owner comes and says, oh, I want it to be sign in for some reason, then it's going to fail every single one of these and you're going to have to update code in every single one of your tests. So there's a separation of concerns in your application architecture. So let's go ahead and then take where we don't have a separation of concerns with our text architecture and then split that up. So now we have our test, we use a robot. What do you want me to do with this? Reopen, I guess. All right, so we have our separation of concerns in. That's not. Okay, there it is. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so we want to separate our concerns out. So instead of the what and the how in just the test, we're going to split it out and have a robot. So what this makes is a UI test architecture, right? So we have the separation of concerns of like, this is the like kind of story of what I want to test. This is how it's going to happen. And then the view is what I'm interacting with. So what's nice now is you build your tests that rely on the robot that then interact with the view. And then if the view changes, you only have to update your robot, right? So obviously all your tests would fail that rely on that, but you update one piece of code, everybody's happy, you move on. So this is a typical Espresso test. I'm going to show them with screenshots, and then I'm going to show them with the robot pattern and taking screenshots. So in this case, it's very similar to the example I've shown before. You're going to log in. Now, if you go ahead and do it with screenshots, every step along the way, you're going to want to go ahead and then take a screenshot saying what I'm doing. So I'm validating I can't log in, and then I'm going ahead and entering my username, and then I'm going to say, OK, I actually logged in. It was successful. And so this is great, but again, this is like non-maintainable, right? The same with this other way. So if you went ahead and wrote it with the robot pattern, and Jake Warden's talk is actually using Kotlin, and I'm not that cool yet, but I'll get there. So this is Java, and everybody can relate to that. The robot, it uses the builder pattern, which is really nice because the syntax is really short, right? So you just say, I have a login robot, and a robot should be very domain specific, right? So you have a robot for login, you have a robot for the home screen, you have a robot for your transaction screen. Like, you split it up into different contextual areas of your application, and you can do it by activity, or you can kind of however you want it, but I like just to think of it as a grouping of functionality. So I'm going to go ahead here, and I'm going to say login robot, assert that the login button is disabled, enter the text username, log in, and assert that the home screen was shown. Boom, we're done. So what's nice about this is if you have a bunch of methods, and I know this is a very contrived, small example, but you can think of all the permutations that you can go through with your test robots, and along with that, each one of these actions that the robot does is going to take a screenshot for you. So what I was saying is screenshots are for free, so as long as you use your robots to navigate through your user interface, then you get free screenshots. So this is an example of a robot. What we do is we define statically, and you can make them private, whatever you want, but we go ahead and statically define matchers. So Espresso, when it's doing that on view, it uses a Hamcraft matcher, I believe, and it goes ahead and uses that and then finds the view in the hierarchy. And so we statically define these because we can do that. There's very low overhead in the beginning, right? It's not actually like querying the UI. And then what we do is, this first one is assert that the login was disabled. So it's the exact thing that we just saw. So it's going to have to go ahead and go on the view, check that it's not enabled, and then it's going to take the screenshot for me. So I got that for free, right? I just call that method. It's there. Same with username. I'm entering a string. It's going to go ahead and type the text for me and close the keyboard and do all these other things that would make it look kind of ugly, and then take the screenshot. The login, I'm going to assert that it's displayed, take a screenshot, and then perform the click. And I'll talk about why I'm doing it in that order on the next slide. And finally, I want to assert that the home screen was shown. So I want to make sure that login was successful. So I talked about like why I did like an assertion, and then I took a screenshot, and then I went on. So I brainstormed with our intern previously, now Android developer, Nick. When he came on, we whiteboarded for like a day or so when we were first getting into this espresso stuff. And we're like, okay, if we're going to take screenshots everywhere, how do we do it in a way where it's actually going to capture what we wanted to see right there? So if you're doing just assertions to say like, is this visible on the screen? Does this text exist? That's fine. Just like stack those up and do, make sure that this is displayed, make sure this text is there, just stack them all up, and at the end, take a screenshot. Just say, this view was there, everything that I wanted to be there was there. But if you do an action that alters the state of your screen, I would highly recommend going ahead and validating that the view is actually there. So you're letting Espresso like use this idle resource handler to make sure that that view is actually there. Then go ahead and take your screenshot. And then what you're going to do is perform your action that modifies the screen state. And so when you do this, we went ahead and figured out that you should do a future tense. So like I'm logging in, right? So the screenshot would look like logging in because it hasn't done it yet, but it gives you the context. Because if you just saw the home screen that said logged in, it doesn't make any sense. So tips and tricks. This is scattered a little bit, but let's do it. So I put in, no, sleep till Brooklyn. I don't know. It was super appropriate when I was putting this together late at night. But so as I mentioned in the beginning, never thread.sleep, right? You'll see this a lot when you're testing Android from the outside world looking in. But when you're in the Android app and you have Espresso, you're aware of the idle state. So you want to take advantage of that. And to do that, Espresso is aware of the async task thread pool. And so if you use async tasks, which are some people use, you get that for free. But if you use something like Retrofit or OKHTTP or RxJava, you can actually, in your Android tests, have it run on that test, that thread pool, and you get it for free then. So Espresso will actually wait for all those things to happen. So if the API request is going out and you're waiting for the response, then Espresso will wait for you. This is my favorite here. So the idling resource example. Idling resources are very challenging. I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. Very, very weird. But there's this very simple one, counting idling resource, and I challenge you to find something you can't do with it. But it's just increment and decrement. So it's my favorite. So you start here, and then you're at 0, but you're going to go ahead and do some event. So you're setting it to 1, you're incrementing it again, and then you decrement and decrement. And as soon as you get back down to 0, you just keep going. So Espresso's aware as long as it's above 0, then it's going to wait. When it gets back to 0, it's done. So super simple. You just say new counting idling resource, increment, decrement, done. And you can actually give it a tag too, because if you have multiple ones of these, it gets confusing. So it would be like waiting on various things. All right, so define your low bar device. So with Espresso testing in general, like if you're working on a team and everybody's doing this, like I have a Nexus 6, I have a Note 4, I have all these things, right? It passes on mine. Everybody needs to pretty much figure out like this is a device that we're going to accept our tests on. Because if you're going to be doing that, like it's not fair, right? You're going to like slow down your development process by saying the test failed when it didn't on your device. So what we've done is defined a low bar emulator or low bar device. So it's these characteristics of it's Android virtual device with the 384 by 640, which is, you saw the screenshots for the most part. It looks fine, but it's very low overhead, and it's only an MDPI device. But what's nice is in continuous integration, we use Android emulators, and we're able to just fire these up. They run super fast. On your own machine, you can do it. So everybody can test in the same thing. We can also run it on different permutations, but this is the acceptance when it runs in continuous integration that your tests actually passed. Another tip and trick is the layout inspector. I don't know if you guys have heard of Anise Davis, but she put out a video on YouTube showing this off, and I had not heard of it before. But as an Android Studio 2.2, there's a little button here on the Android monitor called Layout Inspector. And so you have to have your device and then your application selected that you're debugging. But if you have that set up, you click this button, it'll come up with a pop-up if there's multiple activities on the stack, and if not, it'll just use the current activity. And what it does is it rips out everything that's shown on the screen at that point in time. And actually everything that isn't shown on the screen at that point in time, so the entire view hierarchy. So you're going to see here that this is the very representative of like what the view hierarchy is on the device. And then on the side here, as you clicked on each one of these items, you're going to get every single property, very much like you do in the layout view that you'd see. So it's even more than that, though, because this is at runtime, and this is what Android has deemed appropriate. So this is super helpful, because if you wanted to go ahead and write Espresso tests, you have to know your IDs, you have to know your text. So if you just went through your app as a normal person would, and you went ahead and captured each one of these, it actually saves it as a file. I think it's a .li file, and it's in the captures folder. So just do it for each one of your screens, and you have all the IDs, all the text, everything that you possibly needed, so that you can write your Espresso test without having to keep going through. This is the older way that we did it, before this was available or before I knew about it. So this is the Android SDK hierarchy viewer. And so if you just write monitor in the ADB console, it pops up this thing. And this is like an Eclipse plugin sort of thing. So it's been around for a long time. But this hierarchy view is really neat because you, instead of the XML kind of structure that you typically see, you see this thing, and it's super cool, especially when you get tons of view pagers and all sorts of things. But it's not super intuitive, right? So here you can see that it's just showing the login, like the username text, and you can highlight over that, but it's not super user friendly. So I highly recommend the one in Android Studio now. As I've been saying, in continuous integration, I would highly suggest using it. If you're not using CI and you're doing Espresso, it's going to be a headache chasing down everything. Create a custom test runner. So you saw that we're taking screenshots. I said sometimes you want to turn them on, sometimes you want to turn them off. Nobody wants to go recompile their application and their test application. So if you create a custom test runner, you have the ability to pass instrumentation arguments to the test runner using this --e, and then you can have any key value pair that you want. So you just pass those in the command line, and Spoon will pass those along to your test runner. And then what would happen then is you just specify in your build.gradle under the Android section, your test instrumentation runner is yours. And then in that, you can go ahead and do whatever you want. So that you get the bundle arguments, which contain each one of those parameters, and you can do whatever. So in ours, if you don't specify anything, it takes screenshots only on failures. And if you specify screenshots to true, then it takes all of them. Also, disable animations. Didn't talk about this, but because animations are not part of the main thread and they're not part of the async task thread, Espresso does not know about them. So you have to disable animations on your device unless you put crazy idling resources on either side of them. Otherwise, Espresso will say, oh, I'm going to do my assertion now, and the view won't be there because it'll still be animating. So make sure you disable those. And you can go into your device and do this on everything. Or you can use something that's already there to do it. So Drew Hene, I think that's how you say his last name, is at LinkedIn, and he open sourced Test Butler. And this is a really, really cool thing. So what it is it's two things. First of all, it's something that you can add to your own activity, your own JUnit runner. So I saw that like on create thing where you can get the bundle arguments and so forth. And basically in the beginning, you just say use Test Butler, and at the end you say stop using Test Butler. So it goes ahead and does that. It also has a companion like APK file that you go ahead and install. And if you're running on the Android emulator, it has the same signature as the actual Android system. So because of that, typically in order for a device to go ahead and change the system animations and so forth, you have to go ahead and give it permission via ADB. But because it's already signed with the Android certificate, you don't have to. So Test Butler actually, when you have it inside your app, you can just use their like nice API. It uses AIDL to talk to the other application that they have, their companion one, and it does all these things for you. So you can enable disable Wi-Fi, change device orientation, do all these things like programmatically and easily in your app. And you can disable animations as well. And the other things that you'll see when you're running these emulators for a long time, but like disabling do not respond things and locking the key guard and so forth. So how do you get started? Most of you have written Espresso tests, but if you hadn't, the Espresso test recorder is interesting. I don't recommend like that's what you keep forever, but if you're just like seeing how do I do this within my application, go ahead and try it out. So it's in Android Studio. You can just go ahead and click run Espresso tests, and it runs it for your current project. So what will happen is you'll get a view that pops up like this, and this is from their example online. But you pretty much just go to a screen, you tap on something, and then you say, I want to assert that this thing is shown, or this thing with this ID is this text. So it's a really nice visual way to do it. Another way to do it is with Barista from MoQuality. So I thought this was super interesting, and it kind of ties into Kelly's talk the other day of using the accessibility features of Android. So what he did was, if you give this app permission, there's this little like Facebook chat icon sort of thing hovering. If you click on it, it goes ahead and gives you all these options. So you can take a screenshot, you can add an assertion and so forth. And when you say like, let's add an assertion, you can hover over with the little cursor here, like you see on the side of the screen, and then select, here's the element I care about, and then here's the assertion I want to do. Is it displayed? Is it enabled? And so forth. So it's a pretty cool way to actually do it on the device. And at the end of it, it's kind of links to your Google account, and you'll get an email with like, here's your test. And it gives you the test in Espresso as well as UI Automator. So I'm kind of using this because I'm not super familiar with UI Automator. So I can just do it in this and get it for free. So pretty cool tool. If you really care about visual regression, so like everything that we've talked about so far with Spoon is pretty manual, right? You're not seeing any automatic like, hey, your thing changed. But it is really great because as you're running your Espresso tests, as you're developing, as you're sharing with your team members, as you're sharing with everyone else, you get like insight into it and all those benefits we talked about. But if you're doing continuous integration, and this is where we want to go, I think people in American Express are already using it, and Facebook came out with it, but there's this deterministic screenshot library that Facebook released, and they had us talk here last year by Arnold, I forget his last name, at Facebook, and yeah, it's a great library, but it's different. So in this case, you actually just take a view, so you instantiate the object using the layout inflator or programmatically instantiate it, and then you go ahead and pass it in their view helper, which actually does all the rendering and stuff in their own way, so it's not actually using the Android system, but by doing this, it can deterministically go through, and for this exact width and for the layout, go ahead and just set it up. And finally, you'll take a screenshot and it records it. So the way that works is you like run it once, it says like a master recording of like, this is exactly what our application should look like. And if you see, like, this is only for like this custom view here, or this custom view. So it's not the whole thing, but it is nice to like this one component of my application, I want to ensure that it does not change. So my font size changed somewhere else and then it affects it, like I can find out. So anyway, you create a master set of recordings, and every time you run afterwards, it will compare against that. And you can see if something's changed. And then if it has changed on purpose because your story said that, then you can go ahead and update your master set. So a screenshot is worth 1,000 words. I'm Sam Edwards, and I made it on time. I think I do have time for questions. I'm going to disconnect, so if anybody comes in, they can go ahead and do that, but I'll be here. So until somebody else comes in, feel free to ask away. Yes?
So you said you're going to plug this into your CI, right? Or you have it plugged into your CI?
It's plugged into our CI. Yeah.
How do you get all the screenshots to show up on, say, Jenkins?
Yeah, so the spoon is actually an HTML report that's generated. So it's an HTML report, so in Jenkins there's the artifacts, where you can say archive this artifact. You just say, hey, this whole directory, spoon output, or whatever custom name you want, save it. So every build that we have has a spoon output directory, and we have it there. So we actually, in our CS system, we use both Slack and HipChat. We're kind of going to Slack now. But as the tests run, because it's run on every pull request, then it actually sends a message to the room, and we actually deep link into that artifact. So you can just click on it from the Slack link, and it goes directly to the spoon report. So, yeah.
So you mentioned that it runs on every pull request, right?
Yeah.
So you could imagine, like, pretty quickly you might have, like, half an hour or like 45
Oh, yeah.
minutes of requests.
Yeah.
Are there other good strategies for doing that?
Yeah, sharding. So I think I might have like blown past it. That was a lot, and that's why I have these slides here. But you can do sharding, and then you can also, so anyway, the guy Drew at LinkedIn, they said they run 15 emulators in parallel, all small devices. And with Spoon, and they actually use Fork from Shazam, because it solved this issue of like device pooling earlier, but they use 15 at a time, and they actually like, what it does is it sorts by class name. The Android instrumentation testing thing does this already, but sorts by class and evenly distributes it between all the devices. So as long as all the emulators or whatever match the same specifications, you're just saying split them up against everything. So you can run it really fast. And right now, ours is only about 10 minutes, but we have experimented and I've run that locally, the sharded versions. So we'll probably have to go there. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
So if you test in parallel with sharding,
Mhm.
how do you then run, for example, two pull requests in parallel?
So because Jenkins uses executors, they are both, like, it's essentially running on one machine and another machine, so they're completely independent of each other. It just checks out that version of the code and then runs it on brand new emulators. So you have to have that infrastructure set up, obviously. Yep.
Is there any way of, you have these debug options. You have this option where you can highlight touch points visually, right?
Yeah.
When you touch something, it's like a small bubble.
Yeah.
It would be pretty cool if those start showing up in your screenshot.
That would be cool.
Is that possible at all?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that I did turn that on when I was debugging. So there's like the swipe left and swipe right, and I was having issues with that. So I turned it on and was watching my tests to see like when that happened, like was it actually swiping the correct thing? Like, and I finally figured out I was at the wrong part of the view hierarchy, so it wasn't like intercepting the touch event. But I don't know if I can actually take a screenshot of it, but it's a valuable tool for debugging in scenarios like that. All right, thank you everybody. Feel free to grab me and